So I wonder how you see that balance for, like you said, like how did you put it? It was really great. Like your active participation in your own, in
Hmm.
your own safety. Like if, like you said, you have three daughters, so this is probably even more applicable to that it will ever be in my life. How do you communicate to them their responsibility to themselves to maybe stay out of an environment where unfortunately maybe there's a few monsters, or to be more alert,
Yeah.
and to always but be that, like, I don't know, I don't even know how to word it, to be honest, because it's such a delicate area and a conversation difficult to have.
Yeah.
I'd love if you ever end up reading that book, I'd love if you could email me and tell me what you thought. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I
does that
want
make
to look
sense
it
of what I'm
up.
trying to say?
It does. It does. And I
Yeah.
think that like prevention and, like teaching men and women, because women rape as well, not to, like, having that conversation. Why does it have to be mutually exclusive? Why can't we do both? Why can't we start the conversation very, very early with our children about consent and about what's okay
Right.
and what's not okay? And like, I don't make my kids hug or kiss anybody in the family because they don't owe that to them.
I love that.
Especially if to them that's a stranger. Like, sure, maybe aunt, they're my aunt, or their great aunt loves them and has watched them grow up from afar. But if this is the second time that they've met her, they don't owe her a hug and a kiss. And that's fine. Like, it's not
Right.
disrespectful. It's just respecting their own personal boundaries. And
Mm-hmm.
then my aunt graciously says, well, okay, how about a high five then? Or, like, it's really great to see you. Or, like, she respects that and says, that's fine. You don't owe me anything just because I sent you a birthday present or just because I've seen you grow up from afar,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well,
And
because
I,
I mentioned before this call, I got coming from a big Italian family, and obligation is kind of part and
oh yeah,
parcel of existing within that. So to hear parents are doing that now, I love it. That, like, you don't have to give a hug to someone if you don't want to. If you do and you have that feeling, great. But
right.
it's
Yeah.
not an obligation that you have to fulfill just because you're a child.
Right. And just because you hugged them yesterday doesn't mean that like they're entitled to a hug from you
Right.
today. Like, you can decide, like, and I think just allowing that kids to have that anonymity and that control over their own body is really important. And then having conversations about what healthy sex is,
Mm,
because we live in such like a sex saturated culture that it gets skewed, the lines of what healthy sexuality and what healthy sex is and what the purpose of sex is so, like, if we're going to be throwing it in our kids' faces every time they turn around, we need to be having some very intentional conversations with them about how
right.
sex is meant to be mutually, like, gratifying to both people should be willing, both people should be engaged, both participants um should be willing, and
Right.
having that conversation of like, it doesn't like ruin the moment to just like say like, hey, this, like, like, to communicate. A lot of
Right.
worse could have been prevented if people had just talked
Right.
and communicated.